Grizzly bears are powerful predators, feared and respected in the wild. Though attacks are rare, they can be devastating when they occur. A grizzly can overpower any human in seconds, weighing up to 800 pounds and armed with sharp claws and crushing jaws. Most encounters happen when people surprise a bear or get too close to its food or cubs. Survival often depends on preparation and split-second decisions. As more people venture into bear territory, understanding these animals and how to avoid conflict is more important than ever. Here are 6 stories. Blackthorn Island, Alaska, 1983. The vast, untamed wilderness stretched endlessly, a land of towering Sitka spruces, deep valleys, and the ever-present hum of the wind cutting through the thick undergrowth. It was a land ruled by the elements and the massive Kodiak bears that roamed its terrain with undisputed dominance. It was here that 4 seasoned hunters, William Holt, Jack Warren, Tyler Brooks, and Daniel Carter, arrived, eager for the thrill of the hunt. They were after a trophy, something that would make their names legendary in hunting circles. But they were stepping into a domain they did not understand. Their guide, Henry Lawson, was a lifelong resident of Blackthorn and had seen his fair share of reckless hunters over the years. He had tried to warn them, telling them that these bears were unlike any others, creatures of uncanny intelligence and brutality. One had to wait, watch, and let the bear come to them. However, his words fell on deaf ears. The men were confident in their skills, their rifles, and their ability to control any situation. To them, it was just another hunt. To Henry, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The group set out at dawn, following a well-worn trail into the dense wilderness. The crisp air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds called from the canopy above, their songs occasionally interrupted by the distant rustling of unseen creatures. The landscape was both breathtaking and unforgiving. Miles away from civilization, they were alone with nature and the beasts that called it home. By midday, they had found fresh tracks, huge imprints in the damp earth, each paw print as wide as a dinner plate. Henry crouched down, his brow furrowed, remarking that this was no ordinary bear and that it had been around for a long time. William, the de facto leader of the group, grinned as he traced the edges of the prints with his fingers. He boasted that this bear would be the pinnacle of his hunting career, an unmatched trophy. The others shared knowing looks, already picturing themselves posing next to the massive corpse of the grizzly. The hunters pressed forward, following the trail as it led deeper into the underbrush. The terrain became more treacherous, the trees pressing in around them. The air grew heavier, more oppressive. Henry could feel it. A shift in the atmosphere, a tension that sent a chill down his spine. He knew they were no longer the ones in control. Hours passed, then as they crested a small ridge, they saw it. A monstrous figure moved through the trees below, its fur dark and matted, its sheer size almost unbelievable. The bear stood over a fresh kill, the carcass of a young elk torn apart with ease. Blood stained the ground, the rich metallic scent thick in the air. The hunters raised their rifles. This was their moment. But before they could fire, the wind changed. The scent of blood and humans mixed, and the bear froze, its massive head lifting. Then something went wrong. Maybe it was the sound of a boot crunching in the undergrowth. Whatever it was, the bear knew. It turned toward them, its black eyes locking onto the intruders. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the forest, reverberating in their chests. The men froze, then it charged. The speed was unimaginable. In seconds, the bear was upon them, a hulking mass of muscle and fury. William fired the first shot, but his hands were shaking. The bullet veered off, merely grazing the beast's shoulder. Jack fired next. Too high, the bullet disappearing into the trees. Then came the impact. The bear barreled into William, sending him sprawling. A single swipe of its paw shattered his skull before he could scream. Panic erupted. Jack turned to run, but managed only a few steps before the bear reached him. It slammed him into the ground with terrifying force. His rifle slipped from his grasp as massive jaws closed around his torso, crushing bone and flesh alike. The sound of snapping ribs was sickening. Tyler and Daniel tried to stand their ground. Tyler fired again, this time hitting the bear in the chest. The bullet did nothing. The beast roared, knocking the rifle aside and lunging forward. In a blur of movement, Tyler was thrown like a rag doll into the bushes. His body didn't move again. Daniel, desperate, grabbed a flare from his pack and ignited it, waving it wildly in front of him. The bear hesitated, its dark eyes reflecting the flickering red glow. For a moment it seemed like it might back away, but then it lunged. Daniel screamed as claws raked across his chest, cutting deep. Blood poured onto the forest floor. The bear finished him with a brutal bite to the throat. Silence followed, a heavy, suffocating silence. Henry Lawson had been just far enough back to avoid the initial attack. He had seen it all, the power, the speed, the absolute hopelessness of their fight. He had no gun, no chance. He could only run. His legs moved before his mind could register it. He tore through the forest, lungs burning, heart pounding. Behind him he swore he heard another sound. A second bear, a deep growl from a different direction. It was not just one hunter that had trespassed. Perhaps it was not just one beast that had answered. He ran until he could run no more, collapsing near the edge of a river. He stayed there, trembling until sunrise. When he finally made it back to town, his face was pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He told the authorities what had happened, but there was nothing they could do. No one volunteered to go back into the forest. The hunters' bodies were never recovered. The legend of the Blackthorn Massacre spread quickly. Some say the bear still roams those woods, bigger and more fearsome than ever. Others claim it died years later, its reign over the island coming to a natural end. But Henry never forgot the sound of that growl in the darkness, nor did he ever shake the feeling that something else had been watching that night. Something bigger, something worse. Volkovaya Wilderness, Russia, 1996. The remote, icy forests of this vast region stretched out in all directions, a desolate expanse where nature ruled without mercy. Towering pines stood like sentinels, their branches weighed down by layers of frost. The air was frigid, each breath a visible cloud that hung momentarily before disappearing into the void. Deep within this frozen wilderness, 4 men moved cautiously, their footsteps crunching against the hardened snow. Vladimir Petrov, Sergei Ivanov, Alexei Morozov, and Dmitry Fedorov were poachers, hunting illegally for bear pelts. They had ventured far beyond the usual hunting grounds, driven by greed and the promise of a lucrative haul. Sergei, the youngest of the group, had suggested staying closer to known trails, expressing concerns about the dangers of going too deep into the forest. The others dismissed his worries. Vladimir, the most experienced among them, had assured the group that venturing deeper into the woods would yield greater rewards. The bears here were larger, more plentiful, and unaccustomed to human presence. This meant easier kills and less competition from other hunters. He reminded them that poaching was already dangerous. If they were going to take the risk, they might as well make it worthwhile. For hours, they moved through the silent forest, scanning the terrain for signs of movement. The only sounds were their boots pressing into the snow and the occasional snap of a branch beneath their weight. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the distant calls of unseen creatures. Then an eerie discovery stopped them in their tracks. Strange, deep gouges in the bark of several trees, as if something enormous had been sharpening its claws. They found no fresh tracks at first, and the anticipation began to grow into frustration. Dmitry muttered under his breath that they might have gone too far, that the bears were probably hibernating deeper in the mountains. But just as the group considered turning back, they found tracks, huge paw prints leading towards a thicket. The snow around the prints was disturbed, marked with streaks of red. Something had bled here recently. Dmitry crouched down, brushing away some of the snow to reveal more blood underneath. Whatever had been wounded was nearby. The men exchanged looks, their breath misting in the cold air. Excitement flickered in Vladimir's eyes. If the bear was already injured, it would be an easy target. He motioned for the others to follow as they trailed the blood deeper into the woods. The scent of iron grew stronger, mingling with the crisp air. Their hands hovered near their rifles, anticipation building. Then, just ahead, they saw it. A colossal grizzly lay partially in the snow, its breathing ragged, its fur matted with dried blood. Another hunting party had likely shot it earlier, wounding but failing to kill it. The bear's large head lifted slightly at their approach, its dark eyes flickering open. It was still alive. Alexei was the first to raise his rifle. Before he could fire, Vladimir stopped him, suggesting they move in closer for a cleaner shot. Confidence swelled among them. The bear was barely moving. It was theirs to take. They didn't notice the unnatural silence that had settled over the forest. The birds had stopped calling. The wind had stilled. As they stepped forward, the wounded beast exploded into motion. The attack was instant and absolute. The bear surged to its feet, its enormous frame defying the sluggish weakness they had assumed it had. With a deafening roar, it lunged at Dmitri, who barely had time to scream before the bear's jaws clamped onto his shoulder. The crunch of bone echoed through the trees. Blood sprayed onto the snow, steam rising from the warmth of the fresh wound in the freezing air. Sergei froze in horror as Dmitri was lifted off the ground, his body thrashing helplessly in the bear's grip. Alexei fired, the bullet striking the bear's side but doing nothing to slow it. It turned, dropping Dmitri's lifeless body, and charged at Alexei before he could fire again. The bear's claws ripped through his torso with terrifying ease, sending him sprawling into the snow, gasping for air as his chest gushed crimson. The rifle tumbled from his hands, useless now. He tried to crawl away, but his body no longer responded. Vladimir shouted for Sergei to run, but the young man was paralyzed, his mind unable to process the carnage. Vladimir fired another shot, this time striking the bear in the leg. The creature recoiled slightly, but then turned its full fury on him. Sergei watched as the bear barreled into Vladimir, knocking him to the ground with a force that sent snow spraying in all directions. The rifle was useless now. The bear mauled him with brutal efficiency, each swipe of its claws leaving deep, gaping wounds. Vladimir tried to fight back, his fists pounding against the beast's face, but it was futile. Within seconds, Vladimir had stopped moving. Sergei snapped out of his trance. His only chance was to escape. He turned and ran, his boots slipping against the frozen ground. Behind him, he could hear the bear's ragged breaths, the heavy crunch of its steps in the snow. He didn't look back. He sprinted blindly through the forest, branches whipping at his face, his lungs burning from the cold. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to keep moving. As he ran, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if the bear hadn't attacked out of mere survival? What if it had been waiting for them? He stumbled upon a thick pine and scrambled up, his fingers numb as they grasped the rough bark. He climbed higher, his heart hammering against his ribs. Below, the bear arrived, circling the base of the tree. Its dark eyes locked onto him, its breath coming in heavy, foggy bursts. It swiped at the trunk, huge claws tearing into the bark, but the tree was too thick for it to bring down. Sergei clung to the branches, his body trembling from both the cold and sheer terror. Minutes passed, then an hour. The bear remained below, waiting. The reality of his situation settled in. If he climbed down, he would die. If he stayed, the cold would take him. Eventually, the bear seemed to lose interest. It turned and lumbered back into the forest, vanishing into the white expanse. Sergei remained in the tree for hours, afraid to move. By the time he finally descended, his limbs were stiff, his fingers almost useless from the frost. He staggered away, walking blindly through the wilderness, guided only by the faint hope that he might find his way back to civilization. Days later, rangers found him, half-frozen, delirious, and barely able to speak. His skin was pale, his lips cracked, and his eyes sunken. He was the only survivor, his story one of horror and helplessness. He could barely describe what had happened, his words broken and filled with dread. No one ever found the bear. The poacher's remains were discovered scattered through the snow, a grim testament to the terrible price of underestimating nature. Local authorities warned hunters to stay away from that part of the forest, but legends persisted. Some claimed the bear had grown even more dangerous, that it now actively hunted humans, carrying the scars of that fateful encounter. To this day, hunters in Volkovaya wilderness tell the story of the beast that refused to die. Some say it still roams the forests, a huge frame hidden among the trees, an unrelenting force of nature that warns those who dare trespass into its world. Grimclaw National Park, Canada, 1972. The backcountry of Grimclaw was an untamed wilderness of jagged peaks, dense pine forests, and glacial rivers that carved their way through deep valleys. This land belonged to the grizzlies, enormous, territorial, and ancient beasts that had roamed these mountains long before humans ever set foot here. Despite hunting restrictions, a group of 4 American hunters, John Mercer, Bradley Fields, Kevin O'Donnell, and Patrick Reese, crossed into the forbidden zone, driven by the lure of a legendary grizzly said to weigh over 1,200 pounds. Locals had long spoken of the bear, an elusive titan known to those who lived near the park's borders. It had survived harsh winters, attacks from rival males, and even gunshots from hunters who had tried and failed to take it down. The grizzly was more than just an animal. It was a myth, a force of nature that seemed unstoppable. Unlike his skeptical companions, Kevin felt uneasy about the stories. He had seen a man mauled by a grizzly before, and knew firsthand that bears were not simply trophies waiting to be claimed. The four men hiked deep into the backcountry, rifles slung over their shoulders, their packs heavy with supplies. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. The usual sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls faded into an eerie stillness. Patrick joked that even the birds were scared of them, but Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that the silence wasn't in their favor. After 2 days of tracking, they found what they were looking for. Huge claw marks raked across the trunk of a centuries-old pine, standing as a territorial warning. Nearby, the remnants of an elk carcass lay torn apart, its ribcage stripped clean. The bite marks were unsettlingly large, and the smell of decayed flesh hung thick in the air. The sheer force of the kill was evident. This wasn't the work of just any bear. It was him. That evening, they set up camp near a ridge overlooking a valley, their fire crackling against the cold mountain air. John laid out a plan, deciding they would wake at dawn and scout the area. Bradley, ever the strategist, suggested that instead of baiting the bear, they should try and track it to its den. Kevin disagreed, saying it was too risky to corner a grizzly. Patrick, eager for action, wanted to draw the bear out. John insisted they could take it down cleanly without unnecessary risks. To him, the bear was just another challenge, a big one, but still just another hunt. Sometime after midnight, as the fire burned low, the first sign of trouble came. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the darkness, so low it almost felt like a vibration in the air. The men bolted upright, gripping their rifles. The silence returned, but now it was suffocating. Then came the snapping of branches. Something massive was moving in the trees just beyond the fire's light. Bradley shone a flashlight toward the sound, but all they saw were the glinting eyes of something impossibly large. Then the eyes vanished, and the forest was still again. Kevin swore under his breath and muttered that they were not the hunters anymore. John muttered that they should keep watch in shifts, but unease had already settled deep in their bones. Even Patrick, the most reckless among them, was gripping his rifle tighter. Sleep did not come easily. Dawn broke, cold and gray. They scouted the area, finding fresh tracks leading down toward the valley. The tracks were enormous, larger than any they had seen before. They followed them, moving slowly, their fingers tense on the triggers of their rifles. As they rounded a dense thicket, Patrick caught sight of movement. He raised his rifle, signaling the others. Through the trees, they could just make out the massive figure of the grizzly, its thick fur rippling as it moved. John signaled for them to spread out. They had the advantage of distance. If they could get a clear shot, the hunt would be over in seconds. He steadied his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot missed. The bear turned toward them, eyes burning with something beyond mere instinct. It did not charge immediately. It stood there, breathing heavily, considering them. Then, without warning, it exploded into motion. The speed was terrifying. In mere seconds, it had closed the distance. Kevin fired next, but the bullet only grazed its shoulder, doing nothing to slow it down. Then it was upon them. The grizzly barreled into Bradley first, sending him flying backward. His rifle tumbled from his grasp as the bear's very large claws tore through his torso. A wet, choking sound escaped his lips. Then nothing. John fired again at point-blank range. The bullet struck the bear's chest, but it barely reacted. It turned on him next. A single swipe sent him crashing into a tree with a sickening crack. Kevin heard something snap. He wasn't sure if it was the tree or John's spine. Patrick and Kevin ran. Their instincts took over, driving them through the dense undergrowth, branches slashing at their faces. Behind them, the bear let out a deep, bone-chilling roar. Patrick stumbled, falling hard onto the rocky ground. He barely had time to roll over before the bear was on him. The last thing he saw was its gaping maw descending toward him. Kevin didn't stop. He ran until his legs burned, until the only sound he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Somehow he made it to higher ground. He collapsed near a rock outcrop, gasping for air, his body trembling. He knew he was the only one left. 2 days later, a park ranger named Walter Hughes found him wandering along a trail, disoriented and in shock. He could barely speak, his words fragmented and incoherent. When the rangers went to investigate, they found the remains of the camp, shredded tents and blood staining the earth. The bodies were never recovered. The story spread among hunters, a chilling warning about the dangers of underestimating nature. Some say the bear still roams those mountains, larger than ever, its scars a testament to the men who dared challenge it and lost. Others claim it disappeared into the wilderness, living out its days as the undisputed ruler of Grimclaw's backcountry. Kevin never returned to the mountains. He never spoke of what he had seen, and he never hunted again. Hokkaido, Japan, 1915. Mount Kagomori loomed over the dense forest below, its snow-capped peak standing as a silent guardian over the untamed wilderness. The mountain slopes were home to the Ussuri brown bear, a huge and formidable predator feared by locals and respected by hunters. In a time when human settlements were encroaching deeper into wild lands, conflicts between man and beast had become inevitable. Reports of a grizzly killing livestock in a remote village had drawn the attention of 4 skilled hunters: Takashi Watanabe, Hiroshi Endo, Kenji Matsuda, and Daisuke Tanaka. The bear was said to be enormous, larger than any seen in the region. It had already killed several farm animals, and according to some accounts, even a man who had wandered too far into the forest alone. The villagers, fearing for their lives, pleaded for help. The hunters, experienced and well-armed, assured them that the beast would be taken down. They had tracked bears before, and to them this was just another hunt. The group set out at dawn, their rifles slung over their shoulders, the cold mountain air biting at their exposed skin. The trail led them deep into the forest where ancient trees towered overhead, their branches interwoven like a natural canopy. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded into an eerie stillness, the type that unsettled even seasoned hunters. By midday, they found the first signs of the bear. Deep claw marks gouged into the bark of a tree, too high for any normal-sized bear. The ground was disturbed, and tufts of dark fur clung to the rough wood. Nearby, they discovered the carcass of a deer, its ribcage shattered, and its flesh torn away in massive chunks. It was a fresh kill. The bear was close. Takashi crouched down, examining the scene. He noted that the beast wasn't just hunting for food, it was killing with a ferocity beyond mere survival. More unsettling, the carcass had been dragged but not entirely eaten, as if the bear had been interrupted or had left it behind intentionally. The realization sent a chill through him, but he pushed the thought aside. He signaled for the others to prepare their weapons. The hunt was on. Following the bear's tracks, they moved with caution, their senses heightened. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified. They climbed higher into the mountain's thick forests where visibility grew worse. Then they heard it, a low, guttural growl so deep it seemed to resonate through the trees. The men froze. The growl came again, closer this time. Then the forest erupted, but the attack didn't come head-on. It came from the side. The bear emerged from a thicket, a monstrous shape of muscle and fur moving with terrifying speed. Kenji was closest to the beast, but instead of lunging at him immediately, the bear let out a deafening roar, shaking the very air around them. Kenji hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for the bear to close the gap. A massive paw swung through the air, claws catching his chest. He stumbled back, blood spraying against the snow. His scream was cut short as the bear's jaws closed around his neck, snapping it like a twig. Hiroshi fired first, the gunshot echoing through the forest. The bullet struck the bear's shoulder, but it did nothing to slow the beast. It turned toward him, eyes black with fury. But instead of charging straight away, the bear circled, its breath steaming in the frigid air, studying its next target. Daisuke tried to fire as well, but in his panic the shot went wide. The bear barreled into Hiroshi, knocking him to the ground with bone-crushing force. A sickening crunch followed as it tore into him, blood staining the white snow beneath them. Takashi and Daisuke were the last two standing. They knew they had one chance, run or fight. Takashi made his decision. He took careful aim and fired, the shot striking the bear's ribcage. The creature let out an enraged roar but remained standing. It turned its gaze on Takashi, nostrils flaring, blood dripping from its maw. Daisuke made the mistake of trying to flee. He took off down the slope, but the bear was faster. It lunged after him, covering the distance in seconds. Takashi could only watch as his friend's terrified scream echoed through the trees, cut short by a brutal swipe that sent him crashing into a tree. Daisuke didn't move again. Takashi was alone now. His rifle was nearly empty, and the bear was still standing. He backed up, moving toward a ridge overlooking a steep ravine. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest, each breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The beast was wounded but relentless, its breathing ragged yet determined. If he could just get one more shot. The bear charged again. Takashi fired his last bullet. It struck the beast in the chest, but it wasn't enough. The bear slammed into him, knocking him backward. He felt himself falling, the world spinning as he tumbled down the rocky slope. Darkness took him. When he awoke, he was at the bottom of the ravine, his body battered and broken but miraculously alive. The bear was gone. Above him, far up the ridge, he thought he saw movement, just a shadow shifting against the moonlight before disappearing. Had it left him for dead, or was it watching? Whether it had succumbed to its wounds higher up the mountain, he never knew. He crawled inch by inch through the wilderness, his strength failing him. It took him 2 days to reach the village. When the villagers found him, he was barely breathing. Feverish and delirious, he recounted the horror that had unfolded in the mountains. No one dared go back to search for the bear or the bodies of his comrades. The mountain belonged to the beast now. For years, stories of the great bear of Mount Kagomori persisted. Some claimed it died from its wounds, others believed it still roamed the peaks, waiting. Takashi never hunted again. He never set foot in those mountains, and he never forgot the sound of the growl that still haunted his dreams. Zukar Mountains, Mongolia, 2005. The towering peaks of the Zukar Range stretched endlessly across the rugged landscape, their snow-capped summits standing as silent witnesses to centuries of untouched wilderness. Here, where the air was thin and the nights bitterly cold, nature ruled without mercy. The region was known for its elusive grizzlies, large, ancient creatures that rarely crossed paths with humans, but when they did, it was never without consequence. A group of 4 trophy hunters, Maxwell Grant, Eric Johansson, Victor Lebedev, and Anthony Carter, had paid a local guide, a man named Batar, to take them deep into the mountains. They were seeking one of the rarest prizes, a Mongolian grizzly rumored to be an ancient male, larger than any recorded in the region. Batar, a hardened man of the wilderness, had warned them against it, explaining that these bears were different from their North American counterparts. They were unpredictable, aggressive, and most importantly, almost never seen by humans. But money spoke louder than warnings, and the hunters were eager for their prize. For 3 days they trekked through the harsh terrain, setting up camp near a secluded valley where Batar believed they might find tracks. The first night, an eerie silence settled over the camp, broken only by the wind whistling through the trees. On the second night, Anthony swore he heard something moving just beyond the firelight, but when they checked, there was nothing. By the third night, unease had settled over them all. Maxwell joked that it was the perfect hunting ground, but Batar did not laugh. He felt something was wrong. On the fourth day, they found the tracks, massive prints larger than any bear they had ever seen, pressed deep into the frozen ground. The claws had left deep grooves in the earth, a sign of both age and size. The hunters exchanged excited glances. This was it, the beast they had come for. They followed the tracks for hours, deeper into the valley, until they found a clearing littered with bones. Some were from deer, others from livestock. But there was something else. A tattered, weather-worn satchel lay half-buried in the frost. Inside, they found a rusted hunting knife and a journal, its pages warped with time. The writing, though faded, spoke of another hunting party, one that had ventured here decades earlier and never returned. The men fell silent. Batar urged them to turn back. He told them that the bear was not just a predator, it was a killer, one that did not fear humans. But Maxwell dismissed his concerns, claiming they had the firepower to bring down any animal. He led the way forward, convinced that glory and wealth lay ahead. The first attack did not come from the bear. That evening, as they set up camp, Victor stumbled upon an old wooden trap, half buried in the snow. Before he could react, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into a deep pit, his leg twisting unnaturally as he hit the bottom. He screamed in agony. Batar and Anthony rushed to pull him out, but the injury was severe. They debated whether to turn back, but Maxwell was adamant. They had come too far. They fashioned a splint for Victor and pressed on, each step now filled with a growing sense of dread. The attack came just as the sun dipped below the mountains. The bear moved like a phantom, emerging from the shadows with terrifying speed. It was larger than any of them had imagined, its scarred hide a testament to years of survival. Before Maxwell could raise his rifle, the bear was upon him. One massive paw struck him across the chest, sending him sprawling backward, his ribs cracking under the force. He gasped, struggling for breath, blood seeping into the snow beneath him. Eric fired, the shot ringing through the valley. The bullet struck the bear's shoulder, but it did nothing. The creature turned its attention to him, its black eyes void of fear. In an instant it lunged, its jaws closing around his skull with a sickening crunch. His body went limp before he could even scream. Victor and Anthony ran. They had no plan, no direction, only the raw instinct to escape. The bear pursued with relentless speed, crushing the undergrowth beneath its massive frame. Anthony tripped, crashing into the ground. He turned just in time to see the bear's enormous form looming over him. A single swipe of its claws tore through him, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Victor, the last remaining hunter, ran blindly through the trees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the bear behind him, hear the heavy thuds of its paws against the earth. He knew he wouldn't make it. Then, from the ridge above, a gunshot rang out. Batar had stayed behind. From his vantage point, he had seen the massacre unfold. He fired again, the shot grazing the bear's flank. It roared in fury but did not pursue Victor any longer. Instead, it vanished into the trees, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Victor collapsed, his body shaking from adrenaline and terror. Batar found him an hour later, half-conscious and muttering incoherently. Together they made the long trek back to civilization. For days, Victor lay in a daze, his body refusing to recover from the shock. He spoke little, barely eating, unable to process the horror he had witnessed. Batar sat with him in silence, knowing that no words could erase the memories that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Back in the village, locals listened in hushed tones as Batar recounted the tale. Many shook their heads, saying they had heard of such a bear before, an ancient cursed beast that had survived generations of hunters. Some swore it was the same grizzly that had slaughtered nomads decades earlier. The legend of the Zukar death bear grew, whispered from campfires to trading posts, until no hunter dared seek it out again. The bear was never seen again, but the legend persisted. Some say it still roams the Zukar mountains, a ghost of the wilderness waiting for those foolish enough to challenge it. Victor never spoke of the encounter again. He abandoned hunting, but he did not return home. Instead, he wandered from village to village, searching for any trace of the men in the journal, hoping to understand what had truly happened. Some say he was looking for redemption. Others believe he was simply waiting for the day the bear found him again. Dolgora Wilderness Reserve, Russia, 1989. The vast, frozen expanse of the taiga stretched endlessly in all directions, an unbroken sea of towering conifers and untouched snow. This was one of the last true wildernesses on Earth, home to elusive creatures, including one of the largest and most feared predators, the grizzly. 4 seasoned trappers, Mikhail Antonov, Pavel Volkov, Ivan Sidorov, and Alexei Kuznetsov, ventured into this remote wilderness in late autumn, seeking valuable pelts before winter fully set in. They had hunted here before and knew the dangers well, but no amount of experience could have prepared them for what lurked in the dense, ice-laden woods that year. The journey began smoothly. The men moved through the forest with the confidence of those who had spent years in these unforgiving lands. Their sleds, pulled by sturdy dogs, carried provisions, mosins and shotguns loaded with slugs, steel traps, and coils of wire snares. At night, they set up camp beneath the towering trees, their fires crackling weakly against the bitter cold. For the first few days, the hunt was successful. They trapped several sable, a fox, and even an early waking badger, valuable pelts they would later trade for supplies. Spirits were high, and Mikhail joked that this trip would be their most profitable yet. But as they pushed deeper into the wilderness, unease crept into their bones. The first sign of trouble came when they stumbled upon a half-eaten moose carcass. The kill was fresh, steam still rising from the torn flesh, the snow around it soaked in blood. The trappers had seen bear kills before, but something about this one felt different. It was torn apart with terrifying force, its ribs cracked as if crushed by a massive weight. Mikhail, the most experienced among them, muttered that they should move away from the area. If the bear was still nearby, it wouldn't take kindly to intruders. But Pavel, eager to claim the pelt of such a massive creature, insisted they track it. The others hesitated but eventually agreed. Greed had led men into danger before, and it would do so again. Instead of blindly following tracks, Mikhail insisted on setting up a bait site, hanging a chunk of moose meat near their camp and marking trees to gauge the beast's height. For hours they followed the deep tracks through the snow, their breath fogging in the frigid air. The wind howled through the trees, and the further they went, the more oppressive the silence became. It was as if even the birds had abandoned this part of the forest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they found another disturbing sight. A second carcass, this time a wolf, its body split open like a gutted fish. The trappers exchanged uneasy glances. No bear they had ever encountered killed like this, not just for food but with sheer brutality. Still, Pavel was determined. He argued that this bear, no matter how large, was just an animal. A well-placed bullet would bring it down like any other. Reluctantly, the others followed him deeper into the forest. They set up camp in a clearing, their fire burning low as they ate their evening meal. The temperature had dropped sharply, and the wind carried with it the distant sound of cracking ice. The men huddled closer, speaking in hushed tones. That night, Mikhail took the first watch. Not long into his shift, he heard something rustling beyond the firelight. Expecting wolves, he raised his rifle and scanned the trees, but what he saw instead sent a chill through him. A figure, human-shaped but ragged and motionless, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. He nudged Pavel awake, whispering sharply. But when they both turned back, the figure was gone. No tracks, no sound. Just the trees swaying in the wind. They said nothing to the others, but agreed to keep a closer watch. Then, just before dawn, a deep, earth-shaking growl ripped through the stillness. The sound was so deep it seemed to resonate through the ground itself. Ivan bolted upright, his breath catching in his throat. The growl came again, closer this time. He shouted to wake the others just as a monstrous shape emerged from the trees, larger than any bear they had ever seen, its fur a mass of scars, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural intelligence. It moved fast, too fast for something of its size. Before they could reach their rifles, the beast was upon them. The bear slammed into Ivan first, sending him flying backward into a tree. The sickening crunch of bones snapping echoed through the night. He didn't scream. He couldn't. He was dead before he hit the ground. Pavel fired his 12-gauge shotgun, the muzzle flash lighting up the clearing for an instant. The shot hit, but the bear barely flinched. It turned on him next, its massive paw swiping across his midsection. Blood sprayed across the snow as he collapsed, writhing, his intestines spilling out onto the ground. Mikhail and Alexei ran. There was no plan, no coordination, only raw survival instinct. They plunged through the snow, their lungs burning from the icy air. Behind them, the bear let out another guttural roar and gave chase. Alexei tripped. He barely had time to look back before the bear was upon him. A single bite crushed his skull, ending his life instantly. As Mikhail ran, he saw something through the trees. A structure barely standing, maybe an old trapper's cabin. He reached it and stumbled inside, bolting the door behind him. The walls were thin, the whole place reeking of rot. Through a crack in the wood, he saw the beast pacing outside, its breath curling in the cold air. It didn't try to break in. Instead, it did something worse. It sat down. It was waiting. Mikhail gripped his rifle and steadied his breathing. Hours passed. The first light of dawn began creeping through the slats. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the bear exhaled a long breath, stood up, and disappeared into the trees. Mikhail didn't move for a long time. When he finally forced himself outside, he found no tracks, no blood, just the wind whispering through the frozen forest. He walked for 2 days before he reached civilization, half frozen and delirious. No one believed his story at first, until a search party went into the forest and found the shredded remains of his companions. The tracks of the beast led deeper into the wilderness, vanishing where even the most daring refused to follow. The locals spoke in whispers after that, warning hunters and trappers alike. They called it the demon bear of Dolgora, an ancient terror that belonged to the forest alone. Mikhail never went back. He never set foot in the taiga again, and he never forgot the feeling of those eyes watching him from the darkness.